Okay, so we're ready to get started. I'm gonna go through just each of your folders here and just make sure that everybody's kind of had a time to review, that everybody's taken a look at, and you're all feeling good about what your next step is. So, I mean, I went through a few of your folders last week, but I'm just gonna kind of go down the list. If I've already covered your stuff, let me know. Because I believe Anna's we went through. Fashion trends repeating themselves. Okay, I don't think we actually talked about that one. So let's take a quick look at that one. So primary topics: quarterly cycles, TV influences, social media, how it developed over time, how different age groups adapt, how past predict the future. Okay, so sort of a history of things, companies embracing those trends, primary audience, fashion enthusiast, age 20 to 50. That's a pretty broad age range. I would try and narrow that down a little bit. I think that I would say that when you're thinking about designing for an audience, you're also thinking about designing for advertisers. And I don't necessarily know that your advertisement in terms of your brands would cover quite that broad a range. 20s to 50s, maybe, but that is about the broadest audience definition I would see. I think it's okay for this project, but it's okay to narrow it down. I would then take a look at other fashion magazines and say, okay, well, of the big fashion magazines that we want to be, seen within the same genre as, but differentiate ourselves from, that's what we're going to talk about in the design and the theme as we start to get into it, is how are you going to differentiate yourself from the competition, right? So who is the competition to this magazine? I don't know a lot of fashion magazines off the top of my head. I'm going to say Vogue magazine. I think there's a magazine called Elle magazine. There's probably a whole bunch of other ones that I just don't know about because obviously I'm not into following fashion magazines. But, I would do a little bit of research. But that would be the next thing I would say is, we're gonna kind of go through competitors or references and go, what are we going to do to differentiate ourselves as we look at design? But modern, clean, fun, and informative, I think that's all makes sense. I'm gonna want to see examples of what you feel is modern, clean, fun, and informative, and we're going to use that to evaluate the design. But overall, as a direction, I think that looks good. And if I remember correctly, you're saying you had some personal experience in the fashion world, so you're kind of interested in that. So that's great. As I talk to these things, again, you guys feel free to speak up or hop on the chat if you have a question about what I'm saying or would like to add some more information or otherwise dispute my opinions. Please do. That's what this is all about, is just starting a discussion. But I think that's looking good. Lily, okay. Looks like Lily managed to get into her house. Yay. Good morning, Lily. Yeah, I think don't worry too much about the age range, but narrow it down. It's actually just going to make it easier for you. You can then get more specific in the advertisers and stuff like that. But I think it's a great start to get going there. Okay, so Briley, don't see anything from Briley yet. Briley, make sure you've uploaded and saved some kind of general brief this morning about your direction for your ad.
Yeah, I'm just finishing it right now.
Perfect. Okay, let me know when it's up there and we'll take a quick look. Catherine, the adoption story, right? I think we talked about this. And it's more like, I think it's just going to be more about a little bit of a book. So it looks like you're still working on kind of the visual tone and the theme. And I think that's going to be an interesting one here, right? I mean, let's think about what is the appropriate tone. I guess it really comes down to the tone of the story that you're going to tell. Is it a somber story? Is it an uplifting one? Is it a sort of a informative for, I think when you talk about the audience, it's people who have been adopted or people who've gone through the process, so they're already familiar with it. So it's an audience for people who are going to empathize with the story in one way or another. So I think that could inform your visual tone and theme. But, like I say, flesh that out, and we're going to want to look for kind of references that you feel illustrate that kind of direction in magazines or books that you've read or what have you. Orian's hand. Okay, that's fine. Handwritten is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You can scan it and upload it. Okay, so Cody.
Hopefully you can read it.
What's that?
Hopefully you can read it.
Hopefully. If I can't, I mean, you probably are going to have to type it out at some point. That's one of the
Yeah.
that's one of the bummers of publication design. It requires typing. But there's nothing wrong with diving in and just kind of sketching out your direction. That's okay. Right. The dinosaur magazine, I think that's a good one. I like that. Yeah, I think we went through this in detail before, and you've kind of fleshed it out a little bit more in terms of specific dinosaurs. Okay, so Discovery and National Geographic, and then let's look at the age range. Ages 15 to 30. Okay, yeah. So I mean, these days when we talk about the youth audience, it kind of does go into in air quotes millennials. In a way, I think that your tone in terms of the level of writing, so we haven't talked very much about editorial tone here, but the level of writing, the vocabulary is probably going to speak a little differently to somebody who is 15 versus somebody who is 30, right?
That's true.
So
Very
you
true.
just need to think about that. I'm not saying that 15-year-olds need to be talked down to. However, they are still emergent readers. So you, especially when you're talking about something that has potential uses of scientific terms and stuff like this. Now, I mean, my son's 11 and he can talk or circle around me when it comes to vocabulary. So, it's okay. I wouldn't worry too much about that. But it's just thinking about, is this a youth target? Because I think 30 is on the outside of what we might call youth. I think 25 is probably more where I'd zero that down to.
Okay.
Who would we advertise with? These all sound to me like adult advertisers. I don't know how many 15-year-olds are going to be down with news channels, science channels. So I maybe flesh that out a little bit. I think when you're 15, you're probably not really playing with toys per se, but you're kind of still okay with like video games that might be related to things. So I mean, we might think about video game platforms if you're going to do the youth end of the market versus upscaling it from the 20 to 30 range. And if I'm going to go 25, then I'd call that adult. Up to 25 to 50, that's kind of a range, in which case these advertisers start to make sense. But I don't want to hang up on this bit too much because we're not going to be dealing with real advertisers here. But you're going to want to fill in some advertisement in your publication space. So yeah, I mean, I'd see if you can grab some examples of the layouts. We're going to look at the grids and the style and the team. And again, we're just going to say our next step here is how are we going to differentiate ourselves? What are we going to do differently from these guys to stand out? And I mean, the first thing you're doing is focusing on dinosaurs. That's a focus, right? So that makes sense. So yeah, how do we differentiate? Absolutely. So let's come along. Gavin. Concept. Typists. So all about typists, typing, keyboards, layouts. Interesting. Okay. Now, are you talking about typewriters? Is this kind of like the Tom Hanks thing? He's all into collecting actual vintage typewriters? Or are you talking literally about the entire world of typing? Those of us who went to high school in the 80s actually took a typing class, which is something that is, of course, totally redundant and not even necessary anymore.
No, keyboards in specific. I was
So
hoping
still
for
with
keyboard
computers,
and
digital, right? I gotcha.
yeah.
Okay. Huh, interesting.
I guess I got interested in this world of keyboards, and I realized how I guess it's a I don't know. There's a lot to it, more than I realized.
Yeah, there really is. I mean, I have a mechanical keyboard, a mechanical wireless keyboard, which was actually pretty hard to come by. But I like a mechanical keyboard because I don't like the soft touch membrane style, which is so common on like laptops and things. Even though I've kind of gotten used to my Chromebook, I'll say that's kind of changed my mind on my keyboard. But as a writer, I'm kind of picky about my keyboard, so yeah, I can totally understand that. So that's cool. I mean, I think that's an interesting niche. It's unique. I don't think that there's going to be a lot of competition in that space, which is cool because you kind of have answered your how are we going to differentiate? Well, we're going to differentiate by being about something totally niche, and I think that's cool. I don't know that like maybe that'd be a quarterly. Could you really do a whole year worth of magazines about keyboards? Maybe.
Yeah.
But that's okay. I wouldn't worry about that. It's something you're into, and it's unique. And I can already kind of think of really quite a bit of visual influences for the style of that type of magazine. So I think it'd be quite a bit of fun to work on.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, and this kind of for everybody, when you're thinking about an audience these days, having a niche channel is actually great for advertisers, because sometimes I think your advertising breakdown is really good here, because these advertisers are looking for unique places to highlight their sometimes unique products. You know, so I could see all the big component manufacturers would all be pretty good target. I think your challenge would be distribution. You know, because it's niche, you might not have a huge readership, so that impacts advertising dollars for sure. But hey, there is a million-person audience for everything these days, so I think that's a good idea. So clean, sleek, informative, sophisticated, focus on presentation with images and clean text and body. Yeah, for sure. I do know that there's a niche of people who are really into actual analog typewriters. It's kind of a collectible thing, and they like to type stuff on paper and whatever. But I think that's a different niche. But yeah, good direction. I like that. Okay, so Johan, I don't think is even on the line. I didn't see him log in yet, but I might have missed don't think so. So I'm not going to go through it because I can't be sure he's online. So Joshua, nothing yet. Please be sure to. Oh, actually, I don't know that Joshua's online either. Okay. Lily, I believe we went through some original proposal stuff. Yes, class. Yeah, the parenting life direction. I think that's going to be quite an interesting one. Yeah, we talked about that one in detail. Doesn't look like you've added too much more here. Parents.com. Okay, well, we'll get into that later. Okay, do I have someone? Man. Okay, Marina. Modeling in the millennial generation, trend toward adult mature teens for techniques and advice. Secondary focus on the studios and sets. Yeah, very interesting. Viewing modeling in different parts of the world. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I like those audience ideas. Okay. So Vogue and GQ. Yeah, okay, right, GQ, I guess. I never really think of GQ as a modeling magazine, but I guess it really is. So yeah, those are good references for sure. I think that when you come to talking about your visual tone and style, I think the informative part is probably going to be, we're going to really need to look at Vogue and GQ and sort of decide how we're going to make it stand out. You know, how we're going to make this seem more informative. I think it's very interesting to talk about, to have a magazine that's sort of about the profession of modeling from a model's perspective. I'll say, as working as an art director in the industry, I've worked with a lot of modeling agencies. I've done a lot of casting for television commercials and things like this. And I think that there's one aspect of modeling that I've always found kind of unique, in that the people that I've gotten to know who were the models, they're kind of a unique person. They're in a lot of ways some of the bravest people that I've worked with, because they're kind of willing to be treated like a prop, and they're willing to work really hard at it. And some of the time that I had seen some models put into a shoot, you know, it was grueling. They were there for like 14 hours, and they had to be in full makeup and full dress for 14 hours. Sometimes temperature is quite an issue, especially if you're shooting on location and stuff like this. You know, as an art director, I get to leave and go and get on my computer and take phone calls and stuff, and I come out hours later and they're still standing out there. I'm like, oh my God, that's challenging. Like, holy cow. So I have a lot of respect for people who get into modeling professionally. I think that there's this perception that it's kind of glamorous and whatever, and I wouldn't say that I would call it glamorous. I'd call it quite hard work. And I think that there's an aspect of this that I'm kind of interested to see what you bring to this publication. But sort of a magazine for models, by models, is kind of an interesting take. So I'm kind of interested to see where you go with that for sure. I think it's got good potential and good legs. All right. No pun intended, I guess, when we're talking about model magazines. Okay, so Preston. Okay, Preston, pretty sure I saw you online log in here, so make sure you've got something uploaded and let me know when there is something to review. I'm going to want to make sure you're keeping up with the class as we go. Ran. So this is your hand-drawn My Magazine PDF. All good. What is it about? Being creative at any age. What inspires? Hobbies from childhood. So magazine about creativity? Are you talking?
Yeah,
Okay. So creativity in an applied or more of a hobbyist?
more of a hobbyist. That's why I'm just retyping it right now. So
Okay.
like more of like, because as being someone a little bit older, what has inspired us? Like, I love to do puzzles. I
Okay.
love to sew, like little articles like that,
Okay.
keeping your creative juices going.
Right. So hobbyist magazine, but with an eye to inspiring. So when you're
Yeah.
talking about target audience, I don't know that I see a target audience in these notes yet.
Yeah, that's what I can put on there. Okay,
But
that's what I'm
you're
thinking.
like, to me, even though I find this, I'm totally being sexist here, but that's kind of part of what we do when we niche market things, is we kind of have to be stereotypical in a way.
Yeah.
Older women, basically, even though I would consider myself a hobbyist, I oil paint at a
Yeah.
fairly busy level. So I go through an awful lot of, painting materials and paint supplies, and I probably spend 10 to 20 hours a week painting. But I would call it hobbyist because I don't do shows at galleries and stuff. I'm not
Yeah.
interested in that. I don't want to turn it into work, basically. So I mean, I think I would probably. So I mean, men obviously too, but I think you're just talking home craft hobbyists across a wide range of things, and I think that Michael's home improvement, Walmart organizing,
Websites and stuff
yeah,
like that.
small
See,
businesses is that what you're saying? Small business?
I was thinking like local, but then I'm like, they can't afford that anyway.
Well, they can. Local companies can definitely afford advertising, and there's a very different style of advertising design that you do when you are targeting local small business.
Yeah.
And we'll go through that. So it's totally reasonable. You can definitely build advertising models around small businesses. I did it with a community newsletter, the Inglewood Community Newsletter. When I used to live in Inglewood about 12 years ago, I joined the the local community group, and their newsletter was
Oh,
non-existent because the person who did it before had quit. They left. So I kind of reorganized it because they were looking at it as an expense. And I said, well, guys, you can actually make money with a newsletter. You just have to design it around advertising, and you need to make sure that the advertising model works for local businesses. But we got lots of local businesses here in Inglewood, and I bet if we priced it right, not only would we cover the cost of the newsletter, it'd probably be a profit center. And then after I left, I did it for about 6 years. After I left, it was the primary way that the community organization funded itself. It went from being a net expense to being quite profitable. The advertising sales lady who I worked with, she was a real character known in the area, and she got out and she made sure every local business had an ad spot in that newsletter every month. And we took that extra money and we funded the skate park and all kinds of stuff. It was great. So publication design can be a very local grassroots thing. It does not need to be this big thing that happens in big cities. It can be very much about your local neighborhood. It can be a very collaborative thing of getting interested volunteers together, or semi-professionals or hobbyists. So definitely don't limit yourself by what you see out there in the big publication world. There is the small publication world, and totally relevant and can be done professionally and can be really enjoyable. I had a lot of people who moved out of Inglewood who kept emailing me years after saying, hey, can you still email me the newsletter? I love the newsletter. I'm like, okay, but you live in New York City now. And they're like, I don't care. I want the newsletter. So I'd mail them the newsletter. It was kind of fun. And, the team that's taken it over now, they've stuck with it and it's going strong. I think coming up on 14 years now, which is kind of cool. So, magazine examples, Legorm, I can't read that. Do it yourself, geek.
It's a really cool one.
Okay.
I found it online and it actually doesn't exist anymore. Like it's one of those, like I looked up creative magazines or something like that, and the layout of it is like, it's this couple, they're still on Instagram, and I really like the layout of it, so I'll get examples.
Okay. Yeah, get those examples together because
Yeah.
that'll just help evaluate as you go.
Yeah,
So title ideas: joy, joie de vivre, audacious, never lose your childlike enthusiasm.
That's just a cool
Fellini
times.
thing.
I
Yeah,
like it.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think you're gonna kind of want to, you're gonna kind of want to condense that down into something quick. But yeah, good idea. I mean, I think that's really cool. And yeah, don't worry too much about it having kind of a local flavor. That's actually a thing. So I'm all good with that. Cool.
Thank-
Rowan. Oh, wait a minute. Why has Johan got someone totally pulling a name swap on me? Rowan McAllister has folders created by Johan Ladigus. That's odd. Anyway, social behavior through gaming. Right, so we talked about that. Rowan, I think you're online.
Yeah, I am.
So help me understand why there's folders created by Johan in your project folder.
I don't know because I created them and I did them myself. So I'm just as confused as you are.
Weird. I'm going to get you to recreate new folders, move this folder out of it and recreate it. I don't understand how that even could have happened. That's weird. Unless the only way I can think of that is that Johan accidentally created the folder in your subfolder somehow. But since he's not online, I can't really ask him. But, I see his here up in his own folder. So he's doing the tattoo magazine thing, which I thought was kind of cool. So just recreate yours. But anyways, have you added anything more to your social behavior gaming thing?
I haven't added anything. I just took what you said and
Okay.
Edited it.
Yeah, so I kind of used yours as an example for there. So that's cool. All right. So yeah, that's our next step for you is going to be coming up with those references and differentiators.
Thank you.
Spoon has submitted again. Who was Spoon again? Who beat a spoon? Briley, right? Okay. Sports and streetcar, right? I remember you talking about that. So, new car designs from car companies, specifically sports cars. I think you're talking about. So now you're probably talking about kind of the aftermarket modding sort of world. Is that
Yeah, the sports tuning and all that
tuning?
stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. New parts, community cars. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think while teens may aspire to sport tuning, they don't typically have the money or resources or even really often old enough to really fully participate. But I definitely agree in terms of audience. Sometimes you can design an audience around an aspirational group. That just tends to filter down to advertisers going, well, if that's your focus, we know that they don't actually have any money to spend and therefore we don't waste our time advertising there. So as much as you may aspirationally target, you do need to target, especially when you're talking, groups that can spend a considerable amount of money. So I would probably just I think I would refine that a little more, because people who are interested in vehicles, yeah, but I might be interested in pickup trucks, right? And there's a whole tuning and modding subgenre of off-roading, which is very different from streetcar. There may be crossovers. But I think that I would just refine this a little more. So it's not just people who are interested in vehicles, it's people who are interested in street mod tuning of their, typically aftermarket vehicles and sport cars specifically. And then car mechanics, there's a very specific type of mechanic who focuses on tuning and optimization. And that's quite different than your day-to-day fixing your average, Honda mechanic or mechanic working at, Dodge dealership. So I think I would just flesh that down a little bit more, because it just will help you target your messaging a little bit better, I think. Car companies naturally. I might get a little more specific into which car companies. There are plenty of car companies who their cars are not popular with the aftermarket tuning and modder group. So I would focus that down on the brands who are typically popular for that activity, for that kind of hobby. It's almost a hobby, right? But the parts manufacturers, absolutely. I mean, that's huge. You could probably do a whole magazine just on that one advertising group. Oil and products, maybe. Possibly. Fuel company. When was the last time you really saw an advertisement from Petro-Canada in a print magazine? They don't advertise on purpose. They don't advertise because they don't need to. They will advertise their convenience stores because there's actually money in convenience stores. And interestingly enough, I was the brand. I developed the brand for my Husky, so the Husky market. So that was a client of mine years ago, and I did all the branding work for the convenience stores for Husky oil. They don't make any money when they sell gas at all. They basically make about a penny a liter when you go to a gas station. The whole reason that there is a convenience store is they make all their money in the convenience stores. So you will see advertisements for royalty programs, sign up to win, roll up to win, cross marketing with Tim Hortons or whatever. But gasoline companies, gasoline producers, energy producers do not advertise fuel because there's just literally no money in it. They basically make no money on their fuels. They definitely make money by extracting oil and selling it to the refinery products, but there's no advertising money from gas companies. I can tell you that right off the top. So I would just take gas companies off your list because they don't advertise. They don't need to. You could probably say maybe convenience store advertisements, but I kind of feel that's a little off. I think parts, energy drinks, specific car companies, that's a perfectly good advertising sell sheet. I think that's fine. Visual tone, fast, sporty, fun, should be high energy, detailed with lots of explanations and tech specs. Yeah, for sure. That all makes sense to me. Absolutely. I'd want to get into what fast, sporty, and fun is. And, there's such a big culture around this. We could reference movies. We could reference TV shows. There's a lot of references we could look at to develop that visual tone in terms of color palette and just graphic styles. There's a lot of crossover with street art and graffiti art and stuff like that. So, I think that whole visual tone is really quite exciting. And there we go. We got Catherine Carruthers is joining us from the windy power outage prone Fernie, BC. Sorry, we're kind of getting into it. I know you couldn't join there, but we're just kind of going through everybody's projects, Catherine. So Top Gear as an example. Yeah, for sure. Top Gear to me is kind of become the mass market brand. I think Fast Car is probably closer. I'll dig in and take a look at that. I can't picture it off the top of my head. And I'm sure there's probably a few more. But Top Gear is probably okay. It's sort of the most staid, appeals to everybody car magazine. Just because it's got the show and the whole deal. But overall, I think that's an exciting idea. So differentiation will be our next step for you as well, because there's a pretty crowded market. Okay. We were down to Stephen Balawan, Stephen Jade, publication plan. Skateboarding, okay. So culture, different tricks, equipment, just skateboarding in general. Olympics, that's kind of interesting. Yeah, it's an Olympic sport now. I think that's kind of cool. So leaning towards the beginner skateboarding. Okay. I mean, could be a skateboarder, so I would definitely break that down a little more. I'd get a little more detailed in your audience definition in terms of what a beginner means. You know, when do you typically start skateboarding? What age is that? And then let's really think about that audience in terms of the tone, because skateboarding has an incredibly rich culture and history. It's got enthusiasts who are in their 60s, right? I mean, how old's Tony Hawk? He's got to be coming up on 60. And he's still a pretty big name in skateboarding. So there's just such a huge range that a niche magazine about skateboarding leaning towards beginners has to be careful not to accidentally offend that audience, and vice versa. You wouldn't want people who are more, you know, into their skateboarding culture, you know, as being too kiddie or too soft or whatever, but you also don't want to offend parents, because if I would say beginners are kind of young, they're pretty much relying on their parents to encourage this activity. I mean, a lot of parents, they're going to be skateboarders themselves if they're all into it, and they're not going to be offended by tattoos or Thrasher magazine or anything, because it's stuff they grew up with and they totally get the visual language, and I think that that's okay. But I think I would just flesh out what you mean by beginners and youth. Kind of organized there. The advertisers, protective Vans and skateboard shoes. Yeah, Thrasher style skateboard brands. Yeah, I mean, that's a big brand, but that would make sense. There's so many of them. You might want to just flesh that out a little bit in terms of just picking some placeholder advertisements when you get into layout. Energetic and sports, fun and colorful. Yeah, I mean, we're just going to need to talk more about what fun means, right? And that's going to be your own interpretation. You've kind of got the art director's hat to wear when it comes to developing this, so we'll be getting into that. But yeah, good topic, and I think that'll be interesting to see where that goes. Okay, we've already talked about my gamer dad concept, which I don't know how thrilled I am about it. We'll see. I'm going to probably stick with it just for something to do. Tyler, let's see what we got here. Okay, so a Photoshop file. Don't really want to see a Photoshop file because I can't really add comments and edit. Again, I want to make sure you guys are using Google Docs for all your documentation and working. So, Angelo. Hello, Angelo. Yeah, so if you can just write this into a Google Doc, it's okay, but I don't want this in a PSD format. That's not really an acceptable format for this type of documentation. I like the idea, you know.
Okay, sorry, I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, you know, I mean, kind of riffing on the NASA thing is interesting. This because yeah, if I remember correctly, last class you talked about wanting to do a street art focus.
Yeah, and then the only thing I didn't put too much thought into is I wasn't so sure about advertising. Like I really only put MTV. I don't know
Oh
really
yeah,
where else.
well let's think about it. You're talking about artists. So what do artists need? They need materials. They need paint. They need brushes. They need spray paint. There's all kinds of brands that would be interested in advertising. Whether you're doing brushwork, whether you're doing spray paint, you know, 3M.
Oh,
Okay.
okay, I definitely misunderstood that. I was thinking like where you would see ads for last year, but I'm realizing
No.
now that it would, what ads would I have in my
Yeah, no,
magazine?
I mean, as I mentioned in last class, most publications would not exist without their advertisers. That's who pays the bills to get the thing produced. So yeah, think about who would advertise in your magazine. You know, that's part of the publication design overall, is appealing to an audience, and that relates to the aesthetic of the products and the brands that they identify with. So yeah, just flesh that out and do it in a Google Doc. Yeah, just Juxtapost magazine for sure. Aesthetica, yep. So we can take a look at those actual magazines and sort of feel how we can differentiate last year. I mean, I like that you've put the thought into the word mark already. That's kind of cool, and that's great. It's just jumping ahead a little bit. All we're doing right now is just really focusing on the the kind of the nitty gritty of planning a publication in its
Yeah.
genesis, you know? So-
I honestly, I've had that logo made for a while now. I just, it's like kind of just a name I want to start using for stuff, but then,
yeah, I mean, it's
I thought
cool.
I'd throw it on there.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're going to go through the process of designing a functional word mark, like how you technically do it so it's workable as a graphic that you can use in publication. So we're going to do all that stuff. But these two
What do you
classes.
feel? Sorry. What do you feel for the name? Like, should it just be short, like last year, or should it be like last year art collective, or just like, I don't know. I was trying to think. Like, what do you think it's better with like something longer or something shorter?
I think longer spells this one out because last year is pretty nebulous in terms of what that means.
Yeah.
And visually, I don't even get much out of that tells me that it's even about art, right? I could look at that as being, oh, is it something about nostalgic science fiction? Is it a science fiction nostalgia group? You know, so I think Art Collective spells that out a little better, and we will definitely get into the subtag of your magazine word mark. We'll definitely want to dive in and talk about that. You know, a collection of 2 to 4 space beds with artist features by a small, I'm just kind of paraphrasing here, work followed by a small write-up about them, source information from himself and close friends whose art I want to feature. Yeah, I think that's fine. The Targer audience. I mean, this is just sort of a bigger thing. You know, I know most of us here are designers. So we're not typically writers by trade, you know. But when working in publication design, if you're interested in actually getting into publication design, I would say that just being kind of putting an extra focus on spelling, grammar, that sort of stuff, when you're working collaboratively in publication design, you are working with literary types. A lot of the time you're working with writers, editors, and they are not the most forgiving people when it comes to spelling mistakes or poor grammar. They will call you out on it as an art director, and you can say, well, I'm an art director, I'm into the visuals, and they'll say, well, we're writers and we're into the words, so do a better job. You know, I've had these discussions, and you know, long ago, before I sort of started to realize that I actually really liked the writing part of publication, I came at it purely from a designer's perspective, and I used to be kind of flippant about it. I'd be like, yeah, well, whatever, I got typos and stuff, but it's important, and I'm going to kind of pay attention to that in terms of the use of just in your general documentation. That's just fit and finish. I'm certainly not going to grade you on it. I'm not going to say, oh, 10% off for typos, but I think everybody should be aware of it. It's just part of this process. The more carefully you articulate yourself when you put documentation together when working with a collaborative group, the better it is for everybody. It just makes the process easier. It's a stumbling block for some, like I say, editors and stuff like that. They just can't help themselves. They got to edit. It's like a knee-jerk reaction. They can't even get through the document unless they fix the typos. I've seen it happen. So it's just something to pay attention to. So yeah, Tyler, I mean, I like the concept and the direction. Just please follow the format and then we'll be good to go.
Okay, I noticed everyone was kind of using like the same format where I looked on both PDFs and I didn't exactly see like those questions laid out like that.
Yeah, that's because they're not. I mean, this whole part of the process is totally not covered in the outline. I mean, I'm diverging from the class outline because I think it's seriously missing some very important stuff. So
Right.
yeah, definitely don't follow the documentation for the course verbatim because I'm ignoring some of it. Or I'm adding to it. Like there's a bunch of stuff that I'm covering here that just isn't in the course outline, but I think it's essential. I think if you guys don't understand the collaborative process and documentation, you'll be seriously missing out on some of the most important things that are the reason publications exist. So I can't imagine publication design without the collaborative, without this kind of creative ideating at the beginning of it. So all you're going to do is you're just going to go new Google Doc in your Google Drive, and then you can start blank document, or you can use the template that I used in my folder. If you want to cut and paste, that's fine. But that's all you do. It's just create it right here in Google Drive. You don't need any extra software. I mean, this new thing here, everything that you see, basically, this is just Google's answer to the Microsoft Office suite, and there's a whole bunch of more stuff you can do with it. So That's all you gotta do. All right. I think we
Okay,
got
I
one more.
will switch that.
Okay, so Vanessa. All right. Let's go down to Vanessa. Publishing design assessment. So this is a docx file. So this is what happens when you use Microsoft Word and then you upload a file to Google Drive. It's fine. It's not actually a collaborative doc file. So you can read it, okay, but when it's a docx, it's not actually a collaborative shareable folder. So what you do is you take this and you say open with Google Docs. Okay, so I'm going to do that. So what happened is it's now, I got to save as a Google Docs, okay? And the reason we do that is so that we can use all the features,
Okay.
commenting, all that sort of stuff. So there's no reason at all to write a file unless you're not connected to the internet. That is a reason, but you can actually use Google Docs offline if you have to. But you don't need Microsoft Word. We're not going to touch Microsoft products. I don't like them. I don't want to teach them, and I don't want to promote them.
Okay.
You can use Microsoft Office as you want, but please convert them to use Google Drive the way it's intended, which is with the native doc format. It's also much more reliable in terms of formatting and tagging. I think I touched briefly on heading 1, 2, 3 standardization through HTML and stuff, so it helps. It's just good. So what publication is about: current events and random facts, those seeking to learn, education. In the world that has endless amount of content, how do we navigate? Okay. I mean, if you think about it, that's kind of what Google's about.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's like really at the simplest, that's what Google is. It's like, how do you navigate the internet? Well, you start with this search. You know, I mean, we take it all for granted now, but I remember when I was first starting working in publication design, the internet as a thing that we could actually use for anything was brand new, and search engines were, you know, there used to be something like Wired Magazine used to have a search engine called Hotbot, and it was probably the most popular search engine for, I'd say, good solid 5 years before, you know, you had Alta Vista and these things, and it was kind of this weird space between browsers and whatever, and then Google came out with Google, and it was just this crazy, ridiculously simple page that just said Google, and people were like, what the hell is this? But it was super fast. That was the big deal. It used to be so important how fast the search was. I mean, no one even cares about that anymore, but that was its big claim to fame. Fastest search. But it became much more than that. It became relevant search, and, you know, the rest is history, obviously. But, you know, when I look at that as what it's about, it's kind of like a magazine about Google.
I guess so.
It's kind of interesting, you know, as a topic. That's quite different. So I like that. So ideas about the title. I mean, I don't want to jump ahead too much. You know, you can come up with names for sure at this point, but you might change. I mean, I like these to Ask Mom. You know, it's like, hey Google, ask Google. So Sincerely Humans. I like Sincerely Humans. It's kind of funny. Primary audience 17 to 35. Boy, I find that much narrower than I think makes sense for what seems like an incredibly broad topic to me, but it is good to narrow an age group. So, all right. So we're gonna talk about information, navigating information and learning to the post-secondary audience, let's say.
Okay.
Progressives. Stay away from words like that when you talk about audiences and groups. You do need to understand there's some cultural sensitivity to some terms, especially, and I don't bring this up too much, but I do work with Americans a lot. And boy, oh boy, do you not make the mistake of talking about conservative, liberal, or progressive in American context.
Just don't use political words.
Yeah, it will piss people off, and especially if you don't properly navigate what that means within certain groups. In Canada, we're really, really lucky that we do not have an overly hostile editorial environment. You know, people tend to take things pretty liberally here in Canada, and what we mean by liberal in Canada is totally different than what they mean by liberal in the United States. They do not even get it. They don't know what we're talking about when we say liberal at all. They have a totally different meaning for it. So it is something when you're talking about primary audience and stuff like that, be aware of it. I mean, obviously we're just talking about we're talking about Canadian perspective, but I do think it's important, especially with this topic, because it's quite global. We're talking about the world. So yeah, progressives. I'm interested to see what you're thinking about when you talk about progressives. That might mean people who are open to change, who are interested in social topics, politically active,
Yeah.
these sorts of things. But yeah, I mean, this is so broad. I think it does need to be narrowed down. But it does look to me, as I'm reading through topics and articles, you're kind of leaning towards a political magazine, and that's great. Butter versus unsalted doesn't make a difference. How did MAGA movement get so extreme? So when you cover topics, you do risk kind of like giving your audience whiplash. I think I would narrow this one down. I don't know if you can go from totally irrelevant or irreverent, I guess, not irrelevant, irreverent, I would use. When we talk about butter versus unsalted, like that's almost funny. Like I'd almost see that as a discussion on like The Onion or something.
Yeah.
Whereas, the Economist would probably write about how did MAGA get so extreme. And is MAGA itself extreme? Or are we talking more about QAnon and Antifa and all these sorts of movements, or the Boogaloos or whatever, right? I mean, these are not really, in my opinion, and again, this is where it gets political, they're not really MAGA. They're just things that happen to latch on to MAGA as a mainstream thing that they could use, right? So if you wanted to get into doing a political navigational magazine, I think that's going to be really, really different than just kind of interesting topics to get you thinking. Like the chive.com kind of has subsections of, it's essentially just a visual blog, a photo blog site. So that's a very, very different tone. It can occasionally touch on political things. It can, and it can occasionally get kind of serious with fundraising for people with needs or whatever. So I mean, there's a very community aspect. So I think if I were to refine what you're talking about here, it's a community focus. It's a magazine about education and learning with a broad, that's not afraid to tackle the big topics, but also some of the lighter things. And I think that could be interesting. Interestingly enough, I'm sort of drawn to thinking about web channels. First off, first thing that came to mind was Google, but then I'm starting to think about kind of visual blogging or blogging brands, and really one that's kind of managed to survive. There's lots of them, but the Chive is actually a fairly big media group that does publish. They publish in all kinds of different ways. None of them are the traditional magazine world, but you could maybe take a look at the Chive and sort of go, okay, well, maybe that's in tone and style and direction and audience. Maybe that's kind of possibly where you could build a magazine around. I think that might just narrow it a little bit.
Okay, sounds good.
Who will advertise? Yeah, I mean, right now you could argue anybody would advertise here, so I think that's why it just needs to be narrowed down a bit more.
Okay.
Minimalistic, pop of yellow to emphasize. Well, we don't know yet. We don't really know if yellow is going to do it. I think that's pretty limiting.
Okay.
Beautiful photography that captures the essence. Again, visual blogging is kind of about that. Cool photos, interesting photos that are just interesting to look at and what have you. So yeah, just kind of narrow that down. The dance, current, below zero, briar patch. I think I'd want to see links to those. I've never heard of any of those.
Okay.
But I'm really interested to see. I mean, if this is kind of a genre of magazine, it's kind of a new thing for me. So. It's the editor in me. I mean, I have Grammarly enabled. I've just kind of hidden it just because it can be kind of annoying. But I mean, if none of you are using Grammarly, I'd really recommend installing it. It's free, it works, and it gives you kind of cool. If you do a lot of writing, it just kind of gives you interesting stats on your writing too. So over time, it's just a good extension to add to your browser if you're working on stuff. Okay, so I believe the only person I've got to chat here. No, the Chive is not completely satire. The Chive has a charity group, so it does fundraising and charities. It's got a merchandising arm which sells T-shirts, and they do actually quite nice custom silk screening artwork. They have a media group that sells interstitial video to bars and all over the place. I mean, I don't know how many of you guys have done a lot of traveling in the States. I do quite a bit of traveling in the US, or I used to anyways, prior to last year. Even gas stations down in the States, you don't see this here, but all the gas stations down in the US have little TV screens in the gas stations, and a lot of times you'll see advertising through, or just media provided by Chive Media Group, which they sell out to all those kind of little screens. So they're basically like little entertaining 30-second clips to watch while you're filling up your gas. It's just a different culture in the US when it comes to how media is kind of a little more pervasive everywhere you go down in the States. So, mind you, I wasn't using gas station the last time because I've taken to driving Teslas around in the US, which is way better than driving around in Canada in a Tesla, I can tell you that. You basically just get your car charged up for free everywhere. It's awesome. If you ever spend a lot of time in California, man, you want an electric car because you don't ever have to worry about it. There's just charging everywhere. It's amazing. It's like a different planet, really, in some ways down there. Okay, so who had something? Oh, yeah, right, The Onion. Yes, The Onion is completely satire. It certainly shares roots, but it's not the same as a Chive. Preston has finally figured out how to get your file uploaded to Google Drive. Okay, let me go take a look. Yeah, I mean, when you're creating a Google Doc, you're not technically uploading it. You're just creating a Google Doc. Anyway. Try and get in the habit of using headers. Title, heading 1. Just to structure your doc. It builds the shortcut. A short one pager like this, totally not important. But I just want everybody to start getting in the habit of using these tags and how you structure your content, like this. Okay, so to create an open and collective tattoo publication, and draw in creative thinking people as well as to highlight artists. Okay, and also share stories about the tattoo industry. The target will be men and women age 18 to 25, with a big target to pop culture enthusiasts who are into tattoos. Okay. All right. It's pretty young, so the young end, so people may be getting the young end of the tattoo market who are maybe getting their first tattoos, maybe. I mean, by the time you're 25, you might have a lot of tattoo work done, but typically it's a big investment if you're really getting into it, and by the time you're 25, you have probably not had the funds or the time to get a lot of tattoo work done. Most of the guys who I know have got really amazing stuff that it's taken them 20 years to get all their work done. Tone of the piece will be less sexualized tattoo publication. Right, okay. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it is, you're right. A lot of the existing tattoo stuff, I think you're talking a little bit about differentiation here, is that it is kind of I wouldn't call it pornographic. It's about the models just as much as it is about the artwork, for sure. And you think about some of the big names in Las Vegas tattooing and stuff like that. I mean, it's all, yeah, there's certainly that aspect. So you want to focus more on the art, less on the skin, I guess, would be kind of a way I'd say it. Lighter in tone, less in your face than other publications. Okay, well, I want to see what those other publications, some examples, and I'll want to go, well, this is what I feel is in your face, and this is what I don't want to do. So you're kind of talking about differentiation here in your tone, and that's good. Don't be afraid to use bullet points to kind of punctuate your thoughts in this type of a document. It just can make it a little easier to break down your thoughts. Also can help just get a sense of, have I fleshed out my idea enough, sponsorships through YouTube videos, social media ads, smaller distributed ads to tattoo studios with the newest publication. Okay, so again, you're kind of talking about how you would advertise this. I want you to think more just about tattoo studios, ink suppliers, different tattoo guns, etc. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think supplies, definitely, but just let's nuke this because that's not what I mean. We're talking about product lines, so we want to flesh that out a little more, right? We want to see at least 4 kind of advertising categories here. So I'd call, tattoo studios, ink suppliers. Those are separate, right? So ink suppliers. But, interestingly enough, I've noticed a lot of people do ECT. That's just something I've noticed quite regularly. I don't know if it's not common knowledge that etc. is actually a word. So it's etc. dot. That's the short form of etc., which is Latin for and then some, basically. So if you want to get kind of snooty about it as well, this is another little thing. This little thing, dot, 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 it is not 4 dots, it is not 2 dots, it is not 8 dots, it is 3 dots, and it's called an ans ellipsis, and it's actually a character. And editors will definitely jump all over your shit if you do not use the ans ellipsis properly. So it's just a little thing to learn about writing. It's a bit of a typographic term as well that not a lot of people know about. So inked Prick. There's a magazine called Prick. All right. Semi-afraid to check that magazine out. I definitely don't feel like Googling it. But I would like to see the example. That sounds interesting. So all I'm doing here is just doing a little bit of formatting as well. I'm literally not being picky about this, but using bullets and using the bulleting tools and indenting, it actually structures your document. We're going to get into that a little bit more today as we start to go through examples of gathering actual article references and putting together our actual first publication plan. So structuring this document's actually part of the job. Let's all start using formatting tools in Google Docs, right? Let's all start getting used to the idea that empty paragraph turns are not functional, are not meant for formatting. If you want to increase spacing, you do that in your formatting. This is all part of publication design. It's just, when it comes to cutting and pasting, empty paragraph tags, extra spaces, they're all little things that typographers get really, really nitpicky and annoyed with if you are working in a writing capacity. And I know this from personal experience on both sides of the table. I do typography and typesetting, and I also do writing. I get really annoyed with extra spaces all over the place and things like that. So if you ever get into the writing side professionally, you got to be aware of that stuff. Because it's one of those things that the people you're collaborating with might not tell you because they might think they're being rude or they don't want to hurt your feelings. But on the other hand, a lot of people absolutely have no problem being rude, and that can also be kind of tough. So I'm trying to save you that pain. Let's stick with some rules. So I like the idea overall. Flesh out these magazines a little bit so we can take a look at, so get some examples, either links to scans if you've got the magazines, take a picture, upload your pictures to Google Drive, or if you can find online examples, cool, just link them in this doc, and then we'll be able to know when I go back and take a look at your creative direction, I'll kind of know what you're talking about and know what you're referring to. And that just generally, that sort of applies to everybody's work that I've gone through here. That's kind of something I'd like everyone to start getting into the mode of thinking about. All right, so I think we've pretty much got direction from everybody. I mean, there's a few people who are just missing today who, for whatever reason can't get in. I mean, I know Johan was on first class, and Joshua I don't think I've seen sign in yet. So yeah, we're basically missing those two. So I'm going to have to tag them as not present, unfortunately. Catherine, I see you kind of came in. I'll give it 4 hours just because you can't help power outages. Angelo, I saw you come on. I'm going to have to give Johan absent. So we're not. Okay, so that's only one. I'm just going to save that.
Hey, Tobias.
Yes.
Hey, I just wanted to say I got my thing converted to Google Doc, and then I also fixed the advertising. So I got a local music venues,
There you
local
go.
shops and restaurants, like in brackets, just artsy places, and then art supplies, and then cannabis products.
Yeah. Yeah, that
Oh, but
makes
then I
sense to
realized
me.
like my age is 15 plus, so maybe I should make that higher if I'm gonna have cannabis.
Yeah, if you're gonna do cannabis, you kind of gonna need to
Okay.
comply with 18 plus. I mean, okay, so when we talk about target audiences, it's not like this ever gets published, right? Obviously, there really is not a lot of control over what age buys a magazine. I mean, realistically, magazine. I don't know that kids under 15 even know what a magazine even is, really. I think my son is vaguely aware that we get the National Geographic Kids magazine, and I see him sort of look at it and make a paper airplane out of it, basically. You know,
Okay, true.
I think that the reality of media, publication media, is so rapidly digitizing so quickly that to some degree, I mean, print publication is not dead by any means. It's huge still, but it's gotten a lot more niche. But when we talk about audience, yeah, it's dead to kids under 18, I would say. I don't know that a lot of them are really spending much time reading actual magazines. That's a huge generalization. I'm sure there's lots of people who, you know, scrapbook, collect vinyl records, and try and grow their goatee as soon as they can. But, you know, whatever. It's you do have to sort of think target audience here is just about people who are still reading and buying magazines. So let's just go. So we did go through this, but now that I can kind of see it in text, again, let's just bullet point this stuff. So like something like that, as soon as you put bullet points, again, this is totally not important for this type of a doc, but when it comes to our next step here, it does become important, is just, you know, if you don't have a paragraph return, then your bullets will work correctly, and that'll be cut and pastable into Adobe InDesign correctly. So you want to be making sure that you don't have pointless carriage returns or paragraph returns in your text. You want to let the document actually flow that way. So let's go through and just apply some formatting here, and hopefully everyone's just kind of paying attention, because this actually is kind of important. So
Nice. Yeah, I like to see this, and you're just whipping it up so quick, and it just cleans it up so nice.
Yeah, and it's just, I know it's habits that I probably take a little bit for granted. I totally understand if you haven't been working in a kind of collaborative environment where it's a little more academic in some ways. Just some of this stuff starts to actually become kind of important. But this particular thing, the actual formatting of your text documents, it directly relates to publication, because you often are cutting and pasting content from documents like this. So you guys will see, once we get into that part of the job, part of the project, you'll see why you want to do this stuff. Heading one. So it's automatically building this little clickable table of contents, which will become more important when you got a lot more stuff going on. But single page is not so thing. So source information, whose art I want to feature.
Yeah, how are they? What is like incorrect with that?
Yeah, I is always capitalized.
Oh, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, whose, this is the possessive or the demonstrative versus a possessive. So possessive of who is whose.
I don't know if I've ever really even seen who's written correctly like that.
Yeah, it's surprising how much of this stuff I read an awful lot of my news online, and the editorial quality, honestly, of digital publishing is just epically terrible. The grammar is bad. The editing is awful. The amount of stuff that gets published is barely what I'd call grade 10 passable English most of the time.
Oh, geez.
You know, it's just, the standards have fallen so greatly. It's quite painful. But, you know.
Be in your class so that my stuff will look more legit.
Yeah, I mean, this is just kind of grammar and style. I mean, there's whole books written on style. I've had surprisingly long discussions with editorial directors on the use of the Oxford comma, for example. I will guarantee almost nobody here even knows what the difference is.
What is that? Because
Okay.
I don't know what that is, but Vampire Weekend has a song that is called Oxford comma, and he says like it's like I don't know if you know that song, but like,
Yeah, I do.
he's
It totally
he
makes me
doesn't
laugh, and I know how to explain it to everybody really quickly. This is the best way I've ever figured out how to explain the Oxford comma and why I use it. I had eggs, orange juice, and toast for breakfast. Okay? So I had eggs and then orange juice and toast. Now, technically speaking, if you think about what that is literally orange juice on my toast. Okay, I put my toast in my orange juice. Because orange juice and toast is a conjoined, this is a conjunctive sentence, and joins toast to orange juice, right? Now, in spoken English, we know that that is not how you have orange juice. You eat your toast separately from your orange juice. Oxford comma makes that very clear. I had eggs, orange juice, and toast for breakfast. So in written English, that Oxford comma is actually important. It's a clarifier. It changes the conjoining of and can clarify things. If you want to be really picky about it in writing, there's lots of times where a failure to use the Oxford comma correctly can create a picture that isn't accurate, right? So it can actually join two things together that don't make sense, but you don't have any context to know. So that's why the Oxford comma is really important.
How is that different than a normal comma then?
Well, okay, this is considered by some technically correct. Some editors will say that's fine. I had eggs, because it's a list, right? You're listing something in a sentence. So I had 3 things: eggs, orange juice, and toast, right? If you're using the word and, the only way to really be clear that you did not mix your orange juice and toast together into a thing called orange juice and toast is to put the comma in there. And I just use this as an example because it's kind of contextual that I think everybody can get, and it's kind of ridiculous to think about literally putting your toast in your orange juice. But from an English perspective, that's what that is. When you've written it that way, that's what that's saying. We know, because we speak the incredibly difficult language of English fluently, that we understand that. But if you're not an English speaker, especially if you come from Chinese, and I know because I've worked with a lot of Chinese translators, this drives them crazy. Because to them, they have been taught that and means combine those two things together. You know, peanut butter and jam means peanut butter and jam mixed together. It doesn't mean 2 separate things. But if you want to have them as 2 separate things, peanut butter, comma, and jam, that's 2 separate things. And in the weird thing about if you and I don't speak Mandarin or anything, but I've had it explained to me that in Mandarin, a lot of things that we take for granted don't even have words. Like there's no word for zucchini versus cucumber. And I was talking to my friend who speaks it, and I'm like, what's wrong? Like, what's going on there? Like, I've overheard people speaking Mandarin, and they sound like they're fighting with each other. He's like, no, they're talking about making a salad. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, well, they're arguing over what the vegetable is because there's no word for cucumber or zucchini. So they're talking about long, skinny vegetables that are green that you cut up and stir fry. And I'm like, are you kidding me? He's like, no. It's just, so they really like this simplification of the language, but in the written way of it, if we don't use the comma correctly, if you don't have the context, it doesn't make sense. So that's what an Oxford comma is. If you have a list of 2 or 3 things and you're using and as your cojoining adjective or whatever the word is, I forget now. The comma just clears that up so that you can be more concise in your cojoining of words. So that's literally all it is.
The comma is used correctly, and the Oxford comma makes things weird like this.
No, an Oxford comma is correct.
Okay, other way around.
So you separate out. Okay, so this makes it clear that your orange juice was not combined with your toast. It seems like a really nitpicky thing, and it kind of is. But from a writer's perspective, it's not nitpicky, especially when you're talking about more technical terms where you really might not know contextually that the combining of those 2 things isn't what you intended as the writer or the reader. So that's just something if you guys want to get into the writing side. I think that's kind of something that often gets overlooked, but in editorial circles, people take this type of stuff pretty seriously. There's also like the use of the em dash versus the hyphen. Those are different things. hyphenation. We'll get into some typographic stuff when we're doing typesetting. I'm not gonna hammer that out too much here, but I do think it's important to talk about. I think I saw a chat here from David saying he doesn't have access to the Google Drive. I'll add you, David, because I know I've got your email address. So I'm just going to pop back to the top level project folder, which is this one. And I'm going to share. As long as it's still david.mees23@gmail.com, you should be good to go. You'll get your link. So let me know, David, if you got that link, and just make sure you've got access and you can hook up your project folder and kind of get going on the catch up a little bit on the theme direction. All right, so 10 o'clock, pretty much. I think we've sort of gone through everybody's magazine direction. I think we're sort of, I'm doing most of the collaborating here for everybody, but by all means, if you guys feel like commenting on each other's work, I think it's okay to do at this point. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna break for 5 minutes. I'm gonna go grab a coffee and stuff. And what we're gonna do when we come back is I'm going to get into the references and the differentiation a little bit and really start to get moving on to the next step, which is planning out our first kind of article structure. And again, that's just going to be another Google Doc, but I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of a kind of a flow chart kind of thing that I like to do when I'm planning out a publication, which hopefully you guys will find sort of useful. It really is not a complex exercise. Again, it's something that takes about 25 minutes, half an hour, and it's just to give some structure before you dive in and start building your InDesign file. Depending on how everybody does with that today, we may end the class there and just call that enough for today, or we might dive into actually opening up InDesign and getting the very rudiments of our Adobe InDesign structure going. We'll just sort of see how everybody getting theirs. So Rand needs help downloading your typed Google Doc. Why are you trying to download your typed Google Doc?
Well, or somehow putting it in there. So I got my typed Google Doc, but I tried to just like drag it up there, and it just makes this jumbled mess of stuff, and it doesn't look like my actual.
Drag it up from where? From your local desktop?
From my Google Drive to the concept development folder.
Okay, where did you create the original doc file?
It's in a, just let me find it.
Because you can just create it right in your concept folder. You don't need to drag it from anywhere, but you're just trying to move it around. Now I see an HTML file here. That will be weird symbols, all right, because it's HTML.
Yeah, that's what I just did. So I don't want to do that. How do I not do that?
Oh, well, all you did is you accidentally did a save as. So let's get your Google Doc.
Okay.
So your Google Doc here is... Okay, let's go through how to create a Google Doc. All right, so I'm just going to delete these things. They're not deleted for you, they're just deleted for me. You might want to delete them because they're just junk. So you just go New, Google Doc, blank document. Or you can use a template. I like to use templates because I like formatting and stuff, but you can just start with blank document. Create in a share folder, create. You will get your fresh new blank document. Okay, so you're going to want to take this and type this out. So you're just going to type it right into here, into your Google Doc. If you did, you just want to move that actual Google Doc into your folder, not save it as or upload or anything like that. You're just creating it right in your Google Doc folder.
Okay, I'll try that.
Yeah, you might need to type it again if you can't find where you did it, but that won't take you too long. But yeah, just create your Google Doc just using the new Google Doc.
Okay, I'll see if I can do it.
Yeah, that should be fine. Okay, David, well, I guess once I see your folder, I'll know that you've got access. Yeah, I see it. Perfect. Okay. Concept development. Publication plan. Perfect. Okay. So PDF, I don't want to see PDF. I want Word doc, Google Doc. So just make sure it's a Google Doc. I want to make sure everybody's using Google Drive properly, but I can still quickly blast through this before we break. Nature magazine. Okay, so publication is about outdoor locations, clothing, equipment, and sports location. So kind of travel, outdoor nature life magazine, right? So explore into the wildscape, scenic cape. Male and female adults, 14 to 35. I'm gonna say 14 strikes me as young. 35 strikes me as a reasonable cap in terms of your age group focus. I just think 14 is a little young. Just because I don't think you're doing a lot of this stuff independently of your parents. When we talk about target audience, we're talking about people who spend the money on the advertising stuff that we see. So, hikers, campers, outdoorsy types. I'm outdoorsy in the way that I like to drink beer on a patio. Outdoorsy, I get it though. I understand. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty broad stereotype. I think it's understandable. Athletes and travelers. Why athletes? What type of athlete? Professional athlete?
Like snowboarding, skiing, hiking, and all that.
Like I snowboard and I ski and I hike, but I wouldn't call myself an athlete. Like I think when I think of an athlete when a target market, I talk about people who professionally participate in a sport in a competitive nature. So somebody who trains for Ironmans, for example, or runs marathons, or, to me, that's a different audience. Like there's competitive trail runners, for example. So, and they're definitely athletic. I think they're different than hikers and campers and outdoorsy people, just in terms of how serious it is, but also what products I'm into and what type of information I want to see in the magazine. So I think an athlete is different than a hiker, camper, and outdoorsy person. I think athletes is a specific genre that would be quite different. So it's either going to be something geared towards people who take the sport and athletic aspect seriously, which would then change our editorial content and also change our advertising, or it's more about just people who are outdoorsy and kind of more in the casual side, but still enjoy sports and stuff like that. Like I'm just separating out an athlete as being somebody who takes the competitive side more seriously. So I would just probably consider scratching athletes, because I think your overall theme leans more towards the enthusiast versus the pro. So outdoor clothing brands, sports like snowboarding, hiking, and skiing brands. Yeah, for sure. Alcohol. Yeah, maybe. Beer, I guess. Beer is kind of part of the outdoor experience.
Or something like that.
Yeah, so I'd maybe get a little more specific there, just like beer, maybe. I don't know that Scotch, I don't know if my bottle of Brook-Laddie is exactly fitting in with my outdoor life. I don't know. I guess alcoholic brands, but I'd narrow that down just a bit. Boats, fishing. Yeah, I mean, there are hunting magazines. There is Outdoorsy Hunting Life, rifles, fishing, angling, hunting. There's sort of that type of outdoor person. And if you think about it, that's wearing camouflage, pickup trucks. It definitely isn't. There are big kind of famous female hunters and stuff like that. But there's getting out and enjoying nature without harming it, without killing any animals, without making noise. There's a more environmentally, the hiker audience, if I'm going to talk about hiking and camping, I don't necessarily know that it's fully in line with the more fishing and hunting crowd, right? I think those are different audiences if I'm going to think about advertisers. So I think I would narrow that down a little bit. I think, boats maybe. But again, I think that's getting pretty broad there. And I would narrow that down a little. Again, just like taking athletes out, I would think about, is this more the hunter-fisher type of outdoorsy person, or is this more the nature lover outdoorsy person, I guess. And I'm not saying that people who hunt and fish are not respectful of the environment or nature lovers. I'm just saying that the way that you advertise and speak to people who are into that sort of thing is a bit different, and they do have a different sensibility than people who would prefer that there were not motorcycles and trucks and boats ripping around out in the lakes. I would count myself as one of those people, even though I grew up hunting and all the rest of it. I sort of decided I wasn't super down with that part of the outdoor life, and I would rather we have acquired a footprint in the outdoors, right? So I think that there's a lot of people who kind of have that sensibility, especially when I look into your theme. you know, soft viewers, visually peaceful, beauty of nature, photography. Yeah, I'm going to say that fishing and boats kind of go against that a little. And maybe even alcohol. Maybe kind of possibly annoys people. I think maybe more like MEC, you know, hiking boots. I think that's much more on target and makes more sense. Cameras, camera companies. I mean, I think Canon's been advertising in National Geographic for 50 years or something. I mean, whatever. This is getting a little closer to that side. I think that makes more sense. So yeah, National Geographic, outdoor wildlife. I feel those are all somewhat not in line with the hunter fisher outdoorsy lifestyle. Like I wouldn't see Bass Pro Shops making a lot of sense here as an advertiser, for example. So right. I just refine it that way. So two things: put it in Google Doc form, please, and then use the formatting, and then just narrow your. I think just to make sure everything's relevant with your kind of theme. Just let's be consistent there, and I think you're good to go.
All right, sounds good. Thanks.
Cool. All right. So. I think the only downside of this recording system is that it doesn't give me any kind of a real cue, or doesn't let you guys know if I've forgotten to unpause the recording. So I'm going to do my best to do a good job of that, but I don't know. This might not be perfect. So if you're watching along later in the future, hello future person watching along later, there may be odd gaps in the recording. I'll do my best. So I'm going back to my Gamer Dad magazine concept here. So what we kind of want to do next is we want to start putting together just a basic structure. You know, what are we going to make our first like functional issue of this magazine about? What's it going to have to accommodate in terms of word count for each article? What are the topics we want to go over? What is the order we want to put those things together? You know, so at this point, if I was using this as a project, and I'm going to sort of put on my editorial director's hat here, is I'm going to come through and look at this summary, and I'm going to, you know, maybe do a little bit of cleanup on the recommended things. I think I might have anyways, not going to be picky about those things. Again, this is Grammarly. I use Grammarly all the time. It just helps my work come across a little less like I didn't fail grade 12 English, which I didn't, but my work certainly looks like I did sometimes. So, I mean, that's just in being fair to everybody here. You know, these tools help, so use them. So I'm going to go from here. I'm going to say, okay, well, now I'm going to start organizing some articles. Let's say I've got a team of writers. They've got their cameras. They're ready to go. They're out blogging. They're driving around on their scooters. Then they're just ready to start doing their articles. What am I going to do to herd those cats and make sure they don't produce a bunch of junk for me after my 10-day editorial deadline, let's say? And we're going to say actually that we've got a 1-week editorial deadline, and everybody's editorials are due next class, right? So this is the plan you're going to give yourself to get your basic editorials together. You could argue that you can design a magazine without any content, and you can, but it's pretty hard. You can fill it with lorem ipsum text, and if you guys want to fill 4 articles of lorem ipsum text and just format it, totally fine. I do not expect you to write articles. You can go out on the internet and find some articles, cut and paste the text and use that. That is also okay. Just credit the people and the source for those articles if you do that. Or if you're really feeling like diving into it, write a couple of articles. These articles, you know, your average editorial might be 500 words. Most articles kind of have a word count requirement, and interesting enough, some of the older school publications pay you by the word. I've done a tiny bit of editorial writing for online magazines and stuff, and they pay like 1.25 cents per word. It's weird. It's like a bidding market. And if you write an article that gets accepted, they do the word count and they pay you based on the word count, and that's it. And it's, I mean, you don't make a lot of money, right? You get like, end up getting like $60 for an online article if you're not a known editorial person. I know a big writer for the Calgary Herald who's published online. She's Elizabeth Chorney Booth. She's the kind of food critic, I guess, for the Calgary Herald. She gets paid more because she's a known writer that people actually follow, and she can syndicate her articles, and she gets paid based under a syndication model through a publisher and a rep who takes a cut of her fees. At the end of the day, even though she's well known and she's busy, I would say that she doesn't really make a ton more money. She has to just produce more stuff to make more money. But she also publishes books and all those sorts of things. So it's very interesting to see all the different ways that people make a living these days in publication design. As the designer right now, you guys are sitting in the kind of super senior seat, you know, you're developing a channel for these things. You would think about all this sort of stuff as you're designing your magazine. Your advertising revenue relates directly to how much you pay your content developers. So that is the point of a content plan, is to structure that out before you get going. So before we even start designing anything, we want to know how much we got to fit into our magazine. And we know that we have 24 pages, right? So we have to figure in our 24 pages on word count and then think about, all right, in our 24 pages, about 8 of them have to be advertising, including the back cover, in order to pay for itself. Typically, that's pretty average mix in print between editorial and or content, you might say, and advertising. So that's what I'm going to start doing here. Is I'm just going to build a really rough content plan for a document. There's 2 ways to do this. I used to do it in Adobe InDesign just because I liked how I could do it sort of like a paster board. But the thing is it's not super easy to collaborate with. So I've sort of shifted my process over the past few months to just being purely Google Docs based, so that I can get comments from people more easily and they can actually edit the file. So this is where using a Google slide, or you can use a Google drawing. I'm kind of getting into using a Google drawing, but if you want to use a Google slide, it's a little more structured, go ahead. I'm going to use a Google drawing. And this is sort of just building on my process that I used to do in Adobe InDesign. So in a Google drawing, you've got your basic text boxes, and you can actually do pretty decent layouts in Google Drawings. It's certainly not a pro tool, but for fleshing out your structure, it's not a bad tool. So I'm going to get going with that. So new Google Drawing, and then it's just text boxes, right? So I want at least 4 editorials. So I'm just going to call this one editorial 1. Let's give it a title. And I'm going to put this in quotes because I haven't really settled on the name. I'm still thinking about what I'm calling my magazine, but for now it's just Gamer Dad Magazine. Content outline draft. I mean, the revision 1 thing, not so important in Google Docs because it actually keeps a history of every edit you make, so you can't really lose your work, but I don't know, it's just a habit I get into. So editorial 1, I don't know, what's it going to be about? Your ultimate gaming room or setup, let's say. To my kind of target audience, you know, it's dads who don't have a lot of time. Do they game with their family or do they game alone? So I want to have an article here that is just about, you know, your ultimate gaming setup. The room or space, photos, 1 placement. Okay, so what we're sort of doing is we're telling somebody who's going to go and produce this article what I basically need them to get together for me. So I want them to talk about these basic things. This is up for discussion. Somebody's, you know, a writer's going to come back and say, I don't want to write about this. I want to do it all about the couches. And I'll say, okay, I think that's a good idea. I'm just kind of roughing out the basics, right? But I know I've got 500 words, maximum 2 photos, 1 product placement. Overall, I know that that's basically 1 spread. So 2 pages. Product placements. So we've got 4 pages, editorial 5, or sorry, Control C, Control V, just to save myself some time. 3, what do I want to talk about? Maybe I want to do a game feature. What's the latest big thing coming out? It's Cyberpunk 2077. We've got 6 pages taken care of now. And I'm going to do 1 more, editorial 4. What did I do there? Ugh, I cut and paste the text, not the... I want to cut and paste this text block, not the text itself. Okay, and then editorial 4 is... I'm sort of forgetting last week what I was looking at in the... Let's go and rip something off from Game... was it PC Gamer? I think it was Game Informer that was sort of feeling better to me. Next, videos, features, reviews, previews, features, videos, magazine. Well, let's just go into their news and just see what they're doing there. Lucasfilm. Okay, so maybe like a studio feature a gaming studio. What's going on with Lucasfilm, let's say.
Hi, Tobias. This is Lily. Is this the second part of the assignment?
Yes.
Like after the...
Yeah, after you've got your content structure, after you've got your sort of concept document, then we're just roughing out basic content. So what we're really doing here is I'm just outlining what I've got to go and research, what I'm going to go and gather together to put together my kind of fake publication. So I'm just giving myself a plan, and I just want 4 articles. So I'm just picking some stuff. So you guys can totally make up whatever you want. It's just whatever you think's relevant, just give yourself some structure, because the next step after this is to go and actually put these articles together and gather the content, which I'm going to do next. Like this piece is quick. Like, don't spend a load of time on this. Just get into a little more detail roughly of what you want to fill out. I would highly recommend that you just make each of your 4 primary articles a spread, so 2 pages each, and limit yourself to a certain amount of words and a certain amount of graphics. So I'm going to call this a studio feature. Full page ad spot. I'm going to use up a full spread for that. It's pretty common that your kind of overview of what's in the magazine will quite commonly take up a spread. If you look at a lot of magazines, they often do. Sometimes table of contents are really hard to define in a magazine. They're really buried in ad spots or product features or whatever, because it is something that is kind of high traffic in terms of people paying attention to it in a magazine. So advertisers would really like their brands to show up there. So a lot of times the ad sales group will sell quite a bit of the space on your table of contents. So that's sometimes, as a designer, you've got like a quarter of the page actually available for your table of contents, which can be a little frustrating. But we're not going to restrain ourselves. I'm going to have a nice, big, beautiful, artsy video game, best looking table of contents with no advertising. Designer's dream, nice and easy. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages. So inside there, so you also have to think about spreads always starting on the left-hand side of your spread, right? So that's always page 3 or page 5 or page 6. So you kind of, that's going to become obvious once we dive into InDesign, but it's just something to bear in mind as you structure out your document. But this is really all I need, right? This is enough for me to now just say, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to gather together these 4 articles and my letter from the editor, which is, I guess, technically kind of a 5th article. I think I'm probably just going to fill that with lorem ipsum for the purpose of this exercise. I don't need to actually write a letter from the editor. Maybe I will. We'll see how I feel. But that's enough. That's, to me, that is a decent kick at just getting your very, very basic editorial structure going. You then share it with people. I see a couple of people popped right on. That's exactly what I want. You can comment in a drawing just like you can a Google Doc. You guys are all editors, but cut, paste, make your own, put it in your document, and you're good to go. I do find that this the Google drawing tool is actually really quite a handy tool for wireframing. I use it now for doing like software build plans, user flow design. It's actually quite a flexible tool. So I kind of getting more into using this Google Drawings tool, just 'cause it's got quite a few pretty good options. And I've seen people get pretty classy with their designs in here. I just use it as a rough way to jam some stuff together, but a lot of people are using it, and it's pretty good. So once you're done, you can download it as a PDF if you want it for your local or whatever, but I don't. I mean, I pretty much keep my Google Drive open all the time while I work, so it's fine. So I'm going to close that down. You guys keep going with that. That's all good. So there it is in my concept development folder. So now what I want to do is I want to go and actually start organizing all that stuff. So I'm going to do more folders. Letter from the editor. Folder for that. Article 1. Really makes typing difficult. Also, being dyslexic doesn't help, sorry, but I've learned to deal with it. Okay, so now I've got my concept development folder, so now I'm literally gonna match this, right? So that's where I'm going to be kind of downloading stuff from my Google Drive. I organize it all in the Google Drive first because that's the collaborative nature of it. I want to share my content. I want people to be able to work on it. But I need a place on my local drive so that I can actually use these files in Adobe InDesign. Typically what that's referring to is photography, right? Photographer has to have somewhere to upload their stuff that they've done for the article. And it's pretty common these days that you have the same person is doing photography and actually writing the article. That's a really, really common thing these days. But in a kind of stricter old school setup, you would have a professional photographer who goes out and shoots the job, especially if it's like an outdoor magazine. There's a lot of outdoor magazine photographers here in Calgary and Canmore and stuff like that. And if you're doing stuff for like mountain biking magazine, like I've done quite a bit of work for various bike magazines and stuff, you got to coordinate with them. They go out, they take the shot. I'm not present, but they need somewhere to put the files. And photographers drive me insane because they love to use their own proprietary fancy little Mac-based portfolios that look really nice, but I'm like, yeah, but I can't download the functional file to work with in publication. They're like, oh, well, you haven't licensed the image yet. And I'm like, read your contract, dude. Every photo you take is mine. And, photographers are constantly trying to pull fast ones on magazines like that. It's like, oh, you only pay per more. That's very uncommon. You're going to get paid a flat rate to go out and take your pictures, and you hand over all your finished editorial. They will do the Photoshop work for me sometimes. It kind of annoys me because they typically do it wrong because they're not generally aware of what the finished publication is. But if they do a bit of Photoshop work, that's fine. But what you want at the end of the day is you want a nice clean collection of pictures to go with the article that is not every picture they took, but just the ones you're actually going to use in the article, because you don't want to be sorting through stuff. So what you're going to do is you're going to go through each of your articles after you've got your rough outline put together, and you're going to start sourcing out your content. And you're going to do that before you start designing the magazine. And the reason you're going to do that before you start designing the magazine is that you generally do not have art director level control over the content of every article that you're given in the layout. So you sort of have to make those look good in the context of your magazine. Sometimes you can art direct it, especially if you're doing like a fashion magazine. Yeah, you're going to art direct the shit out of your photography. But that's because that's kind of what those magazines are all about, is they're literally all about the art direction. But most editorial style kind of magazines are not. You sort of work with the content you're given. So I'm kind of faking that process here. You're going to, however you want to do it. If you want to go out and find articles online, you just want to copy and grab the photos, I'm going to do that. And I'm also going to just kind of make up a few. So I'm just going to kind of cover the bases on both of those. So hopefully that's clear in terms of the steps. So Rowan, you know Aaron, and that's awesome. I wonder, Rowan, if you've ever been to one of their Christmas parties, because if you have, we've met. I mean, they have, except for this year, they typically have really quite the boothy Christmas. Yeah. So yeah, we must have met. I've been to at least the past 4 of them. But they're often pretty big, and don't know that we get to always talk with everybody. But yeah, no, Aaron and Elizabeth are awesome. Locke and Henry are like absolute daily best buds, even though they don't go to school together anymore. That's fun, small world. So I'm going to do that next. If anybody's got any questions, hopefully you can kind of keep up with this step. I mean, I realize I blasted through that quite quickly, but please do not labor it to death. Put the time in to give yourself just a structure, but it does not need to be a work of art. It's just something to refer back to. And you don't even need to do it this way. If you just want to do it in a Google Doc that's just linear, it totally works. I just kind of like to look at it like this. For me, it just kind of helps me visualize spreads a little, and that could be just me, but that's how I like to do it. I don't think there's any real right or wrong way to do this. The way we used to do it is we used to stick sticky boards up on a whiteboard, and we'd move stuff around, and we'd brainstorm, and we'd take a picture of the whiteboard and upload that to Google Drive. It's whatever works, right? I just find this is kind of nice. You can make it look as fancy or plain as you like. Okay, so I don't need to research the letter from the editor. That's just going to be 1,000 words of lorem ipsum. Article 1, the gamer dad setup. All right, so I think where I'm going to go is I'm going to do a little bit of Google searching here for, media dens or stuff. I'm going to download some pictures and just kind of do that. I'm not going to record that into the video. I'm just going to pause my recording here, and then I will jump back into recording, but I'm going to continue to share this, but obviously it's not that interesting to watch somebody Google. So I'm just going to kind of mute that. I'm going to work on that. You guys do the same thing. Let me know how you go with your structuring if you want me to take a look at it. I'm not going to have an awful lot of feedback. It's basic. It's kind of just your own thing. It's to give yourself some structure. I just want to see it done so that I know how you're organizing your thoughts. So I'm going to kind of pause things. I'm going to give myself a timer. I like to, when I'm working on projects, I like to say, okay, you are going to spend 15 minutes maximum researching each one of these things. It's like literally a strict timeline. I give myself 15 minutes to do each one, which means I should be done my research on these 4 articles in an hour. So we're at basically 10:45. So I'm going to say 11:45. I'm going to sort of pop back on, check in with your progress, see how everybody's going. But, just because I'm not talking or recording doesn't mean I'm not listening or paying attention to the chat. So if you do have questions or something you just want me to look at, by all means, let me know. But that's what I'm going to do. I just don't think there's a lot of benefit to you guys watching me use Google. Pretty sure you all know how to do that. When you're image searching, you do want to be aware of the image resolution. If you're going to be actually using these in your publication design, a lot of stuff that you find online is kind of low res and not really suitable for print. It's not going to look super good in your finished layout in Adobe InDesign. So, when I'm in Google image search, what you want is you want to just be aware of the pixels, total pixel count. So print, your kind of maximum or kind of ideal target resolution is 300 dots per inch. Now online, your average image that you're going to see is kind of somewhere around 72 dots per inch, even though that's totally misleading because that has really nothing to do with realistic displays, because obviously computer screens are totally different resolutions. So, you don't really have 72 pixels per inch on almost any screen. In fact, your phone is like 500 pixels per inch if you got a decent new phone, and your laptop's going to be something more like pixel density of something like 280 to 400, depends on the laptop. So you're seeing images that are kind of scaled up. They look okay online, but you get them in print, they start to look real crappy. So when you do your image search, if you're looking for pictures using Google search, go to tools and then go size and then go large, just to filter your image results. You're typically going to get pictures that you can work with in a layout. But let's just say I like this particular picture. Okay, so if you click on it and then you hover, you'll see that it actually, Google quite handily tells you the resolution. So 1200 by 800. So at 300 pixels per inch, and you can actually get away with about 200 pixels per inch, and that'll look decent in print. It won't look super crisp, like if you look at like Vogue magazine or these fashion magazines, the photography is all really, really high end, and everything is 300 DPI in your print. But, in your average magazine, you can get away with down to about 200 DPI. So all you really do is you just divide the biggest number by your target, let's call it 200, and that just tells you how many inches you can actually print this at. So this one I can print out at 6 inches wide, which isn't really that big, right? I mean, I haven't decided on my publication size yet, but this picture I'm not going to be able to use as a full page spread and still have it look nice. If I stretch it out, if I scale it up, it's going to get fuzzy and pixelated. And anytime that you see that in your publications, it just doesn't look very professional. It sticks out like a sore thumb once you're used to it. You notice it in publication quite regularly if somebody has tried to push the resolution of your pictures. So just make sure when you're doing your search, do yourself a favor and don't really rely on stuff that's under 1200. I'd kind of call that my minimum. And that's roughly what Google, I think, like you can, large. Basically, if it's large, I'm pretty sure you won't see results under maybe 1,000 pixels. I'm not actually sure what they consider large. 1280. Looks like maybe they're saying, 1000, 1082. So just pay attention to that when you're searching around. Actually, I'm just remembering another thing from last semester that not everybody was familiar with. So again, sorry if I'm kind of making assumptions on stuff, but I'm just going to share my screen quickly here again. Five. Okay, so same thing. This one looks like it might be decent, although I'm pretty sure that's not what the PS5 actually looks like. I think it looks more like this. 850, kind of small. It's got a logo in it, which is sort of annoying. Doesn't look super good quality. Yeah, pretty small. So again, you're kind of picking and choosing through your search results to find something that's kind of workable. I mean, I would crop that. Ideally, I'd like this picture without the logo in it. That might be the best that I'm going to get. I don't want to, I'm giving myself a strict 15 minutes per article here, so I will dig with this one. I might have to just crop that out, right? But that's fine, so I'll save image. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll go back and rename these files something that makes sense afterwards as well. But that's how you do it. So hopefully that answers the question. I'm gonna go over how I like to put together an article if it was kind of a working article. Again, this is just a process of using Google Drive and a Google Doc and linking in some images. But I'm just going to kind of go through a few kind of best practice things that I've found with Google Drive that will make your life easier when it comes to kind of taking your content from Google Drive and then moving into the Adobe InDesign part of publication, which, you know, we're taking a few classes to even get into touching InDesign, but I promise you we will be doing that. And then that's pretty much going to dominate the remainder of the course is going to be working in Adobe InDesign. But we're going to be constantly going back and forth to Google Drive and stuff. So I'm just really making sure that we give this part of the process its due attention because I feel in my previous semester when I taught this course, I breezed through it way too quickly and kind of left people a little confused. And I could kind of see that when in the finished product. So I'm just putting more focus on it this class, or this semester, I should say. So I'm just going to share my screen here again. Go back over to Google Drive. So what I've been doing is I've been just downloading my pictures that I found to my local drive. Let's just bring this back up here. I was just looking at a different project for reference. Okay, so each one of my article folders here, this is where I've been downloading the pictures that I found on the internet. You know, I'm giving myself roughly a guideline of 4 pictures or so, just following my structure that I put out for myself. One of the things that I came across was an SVG file. Some of you guys might be familiar with what an SVG file is. It stands for Scalable Vector Graphic, and it is a web-only format. However, Adobe Illustrator can open it, and you can then save it as an AI file and use it for print. So if you're looking for logos and things like that, and you do come across an SVG file, it's a good idea to just kind of try and preview it in a browser tab to make sure it actually is a valid SVG file. You can just drag it right into your driver like that. But what's kind of cool about SVG files is they are scalable. They're just not super well supported quite yet in the world of HTML and CSS, so they're not super common, but when you can find them, they're really nice flexible files. So you can open this SVG file in Adobe Illustrator and use it for print. So if you do happen to be looking for logos and things, that is a format you can use. Otherwise, you're looking for PNGs or JPEGs. So I've kind of gathered these things together into my various folders. You know, haven't really gotten too into it. This one looks kind of distorted and screwed up. I might have to fix that. Oh, did I forget to download my stuff for Article 4? Might have got a little distracted answering some emails and stuff. Oh, right. Okay, well, whatever. I'm going to go through the process anyways. I haven't quite finished. So, go back to my Google Drive. This is purely just for the collaborative aspect. Obviously, you guys want your files locally so that you can work with them in Adobe InDesign. But for review purposes, let's go through the process of now just organizing things back up to Google Drive. So it's just a drag and drop. Okay. I'm going to put an article in here and I'm going to put the photos in here. So I'm just going to do one article, but this will need to be done 4 times over for each of my 4 articles. So I'm just going to grab them all, upload them. This is better than referencing a URL in the document. You can do it for sure, but just to go through the process of actually having the physical file available so that you've got something that you can work with in InDesign. We want to make sure this is what's done. So after you've downloaded your pictures, upload each of the related photos for that article to the kind of concept dev subfolder. I'm now going to put the article together. So again, this is just a Google Doc, blank document. Call it Article 1. So again, yeah, feel free to, if any of you guys have a question, pop on to the speaker. Willie, you got your content outline done. Perfect. I'll go and take a quick look. Just going to close my stuff down here. So I'm going to call it done for today. Right, this article I'm pretty sure I linked it, but whatever, I can find it again if I have to. Okay, so let's go over to Lily's folder. Content outline. Okay, so you just did it as a Google Doc, so that's cool. Okay, so I mean, sure, go ahead, use some special fonts. That's okay. That's all right. I mean, we're going to get into using some best practices in terms of